Welcome back to Bondversations. Bondversations, a bootleg universe YouTube series in which three dorks talk about the James Bond franchise. Because we looked around at all the videos on YouTube and discovered that there were no white men talking about movies on the internet. It's a real market inefficiency, and we thought we'd fill that gap. I am Lasky, Samuel Lasky.
I'm Clark, Kenlon Clark.
I'm Hughes, Graham Hughes.
Okay. And we are all writer, director, producer, VFX artists at Bootleg Universe.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Nice and efficient.
Yeah. Today, we want to talk about the future of the Bond franchise, where we'd like to see it go, maybe some interesting casting choices, because obviously after No Time to Die, the Bond franchise is in a transitional period. As transitional as it could possibly be. I think it's as definitive as an ending as it can possibly be. Spoiler alert for No Time to Die. Daniel Craig is dead. It's over. Mm-hmm. They blew him up. Mm-hmm. They gave him like a terminal disease and then blew him up. He is as dead as possibly can be. I know I've seen like some fan theories on Reddit. They're like, well, technically, you don't see his body get incinerated. It's just explosions. So maybe, but no, it's over. We're done with this now. So, well, we're moving forward with the James Bond franchise. I want to talk about what we would like to see from the next iteration after the Daniel Craig version. Ken, what in general terms would you like to see? What would you like the franchise to return to or do differently from the current iteration?
Starting with me.
Yeah.
This is really a heavily debated topic amongst us Bond enthusiasts and probably, the movie going public in general that, likes these films and likes adventure and action films. And I think that in a weird way, a lot of people will feel like Bond is at a crossroads right now in terms of, where do you go from here? And there's a number of factors that I think weigh into that. But I would think that in some ways, the biggest one is actually Daniel Craig really, I think, defined Bond for the last 15 years in the minds of a lot of people.
Yeah.
And not to take away from any of the other Bond actors that are all fabulous. And I'm sure we'll kind of talk about, all their strengths and qualities. And each one really brought a lot, I think, to Bond to keep him going and keep him alive for 60 years. But it's hard to argue with the fact that Daniel Craig's take on Bond, I think, was a little more personal in a weird way. And I won't digress into, because I've been thinking a lot since we did our first Bondversation about Skyfall and like why that movie is the highest grossing of all the Bond films and what like beyond just the style or the aesthetic or anything like that, like what is it that would speak to, enough people to make it $1 billion franchise or $1 billion film. And I think he really brought a lot of relatability and really brought Bond into a...
He took something that I think a lot of people, especially post Austin Powers, I don't think you can minimize the importance of Austin Powers on where this franchise was and where it's going to go in the future.
Yeah. Right.
I think Bond had kind of become a joke in a lot of people's minds. Right. There have been a lot of parodies. If you look at the box office of the Sean Connery movies, a lot of them were top 10, even top 5 of their year. That was not true for the most part of the rest of the movies.
Right.
It really wasn't until Daniel Craig that these movies exploded again in the popular consciousness. So like you're saying, for a lot of people, Daniel Craig is James Bond. Sean Connery is not James Bond. Roger Moore is not. Pierce Brosnan, Timothy Dalton, George Lazenby. None of these guys are James Bond to the majority of Americans now. It is Daniel Craig. So how do you get away from Daniel Craig?
And I think one of the reasons why, I think what he brought to Bond as a character is he's kind of like this, I'd say almost like this amazing art house actor in the body of an action hero. And so he kind of combined these two qualities in this, because his physicality, I think, really stood out in Casino Royale. Wow, Bond is he was pretty he looked like this muscle-bound action hero, but he really brought a lot of the kind of, the inner turmoil of the character to the forefront. And so the biggest hurdle, I think, first is casting.
Yeah.
Then second is approach.
Yeah.
Right.
I think whoever comes after Craig is at very large risk of being George Lazenby in the minds of the audience.
Right.
The sacrificial lamb who does one or two movies. And to a lesser extent, I think this also happened with Timothy Dalton, where Roger Moore had been Bond for 20 years and a generation had grown up with Roger Moore. And suddenly Timothy Dalton is coming in and doing something completely different from what Moore was doing.
Yeah, totally different.
Even though his two movies had the same production crew, director, writers as the last three Roger Moore movies.
Right. The great John Glenn directed all of them.
Right, exactly. You run the risk of every couple iterations just getting somebody who isn't going to last because the previous guy was so monumental in and iconic in the eyes of the audience.
Mm-hmm. And really did it for a long time. So it's not like they necessarily just made say 3 Bond films over 6 years. It's been since 2006. Effectively 15 years, which is he's the longest, had the longest tenure as Bond. So I think casting's number one, and I think general approach is number 2.
All right. So do we want to get into casting? And
this is a heavy one.
Yeah. So let me monologue
I'm sweating.
Let me monologue a little bit about what I think a lot of people who speculate about this get wrong, and what I don't want to see in the next James Bond. Number one, you have to find somebody who is not a huge household name. Right. None of these guys were huge household names when they got the role. They all had careers to one extent or another. George Lazenby probably he was completely unknown. I think he was just a model in Australia. But all these guys had careers beforehand. Daniel Craig had Layer Cake and Munich. But if you ask the average person in 2006, who's Daniel Craig, they would have no idea who he is. They don't know the third lead of Munich. And so that allows each of them to step into the role of Bond and just be James Bond.
Yeah.
You don't see Sean Connery as James Bond. You see James Bond as James Bond. You don't see Daniel Craig as James Bond. You see James Bond as James Bond. And so a lot of the speculation about who would be a good Bond centers on people who are already famous.
Yeah.
And also people who are a little too old. The other thing that I think people get wrong is you need a guy in his probably early 30s who could theoretically occupy the role for another 15 years.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, here's the thing. I'm fine with an older Bond. I think in the books, not that the movies are beholden to the books, but I think the 00s retire at 45. And so, you want to, I think, stay within that realm, of, yes, 30s to probably mid to late 40s, you could get away with.
They also did a weird thing with Daniel Craig where the first two movies are he's a rookie agent or rookie 00. He's just coming into his own. He's just figuring things out. And then we immediately jumped in the last 3 movies to he's an old man at the end of his rope.
This will be a topic at some point because
we have to. I love Skyfall, but this is the weirdest thing about Skyfall.
Yes, Skyfall is, Skyfall is a film about the midlife crisis. And it's about the idea of at what point do you feel like you're out to pasture, or are you actually getting better? And now you've overcome things and become better. It plays like the last film in a series.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at the time, maybe it was because maybe that Daniel
Craig was asking for a lot of money at that point.
Yeah, and it was then you had this kind of it would have probably been a great. I mean, it's a great film, but placement wise, it feels as though, yes, there must have been 6 or 7 Bond adventures between Quantum of Solace and the beginning of Skyfall. Right. But
so here are a couple names that get thrown out a lot that I think
probably on my list
that have to be crossed off because they're too old and too famous already.
Okay.
Yep.
A number one is Idris Elba.
Obviously.
Yeah.
I am sorry, people. Idris Elba would have been an amazing Bond when they were casting for the Craig era.
He would have been like, in a weird way, I just see he would look so freaking cool on a train in like a Hawaiian shirt, beating a bunch of thugs up. Like,
Love it.
Idris Elba in Casino Royale would have been fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Coming right off of The Wire and
got
Stringer
the
Bell.
physicality. He's got the class. He's just like
But
handsome.
Idris Elba, I think, is like 44, 45. He'll be 48 probably.
I think he's 48. He's 48 now.
I don't think he's that old. But either way, he's too old. Either way, he's too old. Tom Hardy. Tom Hardy is Tom Hardy.
Yeah.
Tom Hardy would bring. Here's the thing, though, to see why people really like it. He would bring, I think, a similar energy that Daniel Craig
He would
bring.
be Daniel Craig 2.0.
And he has the other thing. He has the feeling of a dangerous man.
Yeah.
And
I was going to say Daniel Craig was like the thug Bond, and Tom Hardy would be even more that.
yes, in some ways, like Bond is like a thuggish dude with just great tastes in clothes and all those things. I think we talked about that before, but yeah. So Tom Hardy would bring that energy. But
And then there's two more that I have here. Both Marvel actors who I think get thrown in here because they're
Okay.
Marvel actors. Benedict Cumberbatch and Tom Hiddleston.
Ah, yeah.
yes, yeah,
Because either way, it would be Doctor Strange / Sherlock as James Bond, not James Bond as James Bond, or Loki as James Bond, not James Bond as James Bond.
right. Tom Hiddleston would have been, he also would have been not a bad choice if you wanted to go for like that charming.
I think Tom Hiddleston would have taken it back to like the Pierce Brosnan kind of suave era more than the Daniel Craig brawler, which I think is maybe what we want when we're talking about approach after this.
Yeah.
So what are some names of people that you have on your list? Your dream casting
My
list?
dream casting. I'm not going to go in a particular order here, okay? I don't think there is an order. And I think my first one I'm going to suggest is also a very obvious choice. And that would be Henry Cavill. Mm-hmm. And here's the reason why he would make actually a great Bond. Is if you combine his character from Mission Impossible Fallout with his character from Napoleon Solo in The Man from U.N.C.L.E.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to put those two together, it's pretty Bond.
It feels like he's been auditioning for James Bond his entire career.
Yes. Yeah. And I think he's, I don't know, I'm not sure how old he is, 37, 38. He still obviously looks great. He's built like, Superman, obviously. Yeah. And I think I don't know. I think he'd be, he seems like the obvious choice, but the reason for that is because he, like you said, he's been dancing around certain aspects that are very Bond-esque. And the thing is that Roger Moore had done The Saint before he did Bond, and Pierce Brosnan had done Remington Steele, which was kind of we'll say Bond-esque kind of character. So there's certain kind of aspects where you can see how there's like been a slight pre-audition, although not super famous like you're saying, but a little bit of that where the testing ground has kind of been there. So Henry Cavill has kind of showcased a little of that.
I go back and forth on Henry Cavill because he has played Superman.
Yeah.
That's my concern.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's obviously very famous. I would love to see them. Bond has a slight scar on his cheek in the books. I'd love to see them have to even like a handsome face like Henry Cavill's to be willing to do the identifiable scar.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's first name on the list.
All right.
Interesting.
Graham, do you have a name to throw out here?
My pick, I think, would have been better a year ago.
Right.
But Robert Pattinson.
I think, right. I like Robert Pattinson for many of the same reasons I like Henry Cavill. The problem is Batman and Superman. They already inhabit an iconic character. But I think Robert Pattinson in Tenet is like such a good audition for James Bond.
Yeah.
He's so good in that movie.
Perfect. He looks great in a suit. He's young enough to carry it for a long time. He's genuinely a great actor. I feel like he might be kind of, just may sound mean to say, but he might be a little better than Bond. But I would love to see him try it because I think he would just knock it out of the park.
I think so. I think, unfortunately, the Batman production schedule probably prohibits him from ever being Bond.
Are they doing a sequel?
They've already announced a Batman sequel. Yeah.
And these are both franchises that require 6 to 9 months per movie.
Yeah.
And Robert Pattinson is a guy who likes to use his clout to make smaller, weirder things, which is one of the reasons why I love him and I think he's so interesting.
For sure.
I wouldn't mind seeing them incorporate more Bond aspects into Batman. Obviously, Batman has a little bit of a Bond quality.
You didn't get enough of that from the Nolan movies?
Well, I mean, it works. It totally works. And so, to kind of, satisfy a little of that.
All right. I'm going to just throw out some names that are currently sort of considered to be in the running. Not my choices, but I want to see how you react to them.
Okay.
The first is Richard Madden from Game of Thrones.
Richard Madden.
Rob Stark.
Is I will say on my list as well.
I would say he's probably the front runner if you listen to the trades.
And also, I don't know if you guys watch The Bodyguard.
I haven't, but I've heard it's a very good audition for Bond.
It's another one where you can see somebody dip their toe in the water. And so the stretch to playing an iconic, role like this feels like it minimalizes the jump just a little bit because it's like, okay, you've seen it. And his character isn't super Bond-esque, although he kind of is a little bit. It's in that direction. He's very troubled, that character in The Bodyguard. So he would bring to some degree some of the, I think they could kind of go with a little more of the emotional weight with that. And
And then Roger Jean Page, who was in Bridgerton. I haven't watched it. My wife has. She found him very handsome and charming. That's about all I can say. Then Henry Golding from Crazy Rich Asians, the main love interest, who kind of, I'm sorry, Constance Wu, kind of blew Constance Wu off the screen in that movie. He was also in The Gentleman.
The Gentleman, love The Gentleman. I think he'd. He's handsome. He looks like Bond. I'm
going to throw out a couple left turns here. Maybe not so much left turns, but I also want to.
I want to hear the oddball choices. Like,
okay.
What are the
well, so first, I want to preface this by asking the question that a lot of people are asking: does James Bond need to be white? And I'm very sorry, Internet. Yes, I know we are 3 white men having this conversation. Feel free to ignore what we're saying or yell at us, whatever you want to do. Angry people of the Internet. Does James Bond need to be white? Because I think I have an answer to this, unless
Go
you guys...
ahead.
Okay. So the answer is no. Yep. But I also don't think that his race has no impact on what the character is or what the movie would be. Because
for sure, it would definitely have a fairly large effect on
this is let's say an imperialist franchise. This is a franchise about Great Britain as a colonial superpower enforcing its will around the world.
Right. And I think that they had talked about this, that there's a quote, and I might be misquoting, but that they said, as long as he's British.
Right.
That's basically
well, that's the other thing. We haven't mentioned this. James Bond has to come from a Commonwealth realm.
Yeah.
Right.
Preferably from one of the British Isles.
Could be Canadian.
No. They tried an Australian and they
Canadian.
immediately. Although Sam Neill was also...
There's a lot of good Canadian actors now that I think about it.
George Lazenby was Australian. They considered Sam Neill, who's a New Zealander or Australian.
Oh, yeah.
Back in the Timothy Dalton era.
Yeah, it's interesting to listen to people who had been, and I think they even had approached Burt Reynolds.
That would have been terrible.
And he himself was the one who said no.
I love Burt Reynolds. That would be awful.
Yeah, his name was floated around in the 70s, and I think they'd even talked to him about it, and he had said Bond's got to be British.
Right. But so anyway, so long as they're British or from the British Isles, because it could be Irish. There's Irish, Welsh. Scottish, lots of different
dishes.
Yeah, nationalities from the British Isles. But like I said, I think if you cast a black man or a man of Indian descent, you have to deal with that somehow in the story.
It's going to make its way into the
right
story,
when
whether you like it or not.
When they're going around and beating up brown people around the world in the name of Her Majesty, are they going to get called out on it by somebody? I don't think it needs to be a big part, but I think it does have to be dealt with somehow in the story. So I've got a couple: John Boyega, Daniel Kaluuya.
Yes.
Yeah. This is somebody that nobody's going to recognize because nobody in America watched Gangs of London, which is one of my favorite recent TV shows. Sope Dirisu. Yeah, I know.
We'll watch that.
So Gangs of London is a show created by Gareth Evans, the guy who did The Raid. And it's about power struggles between the various gangs of London, and Sope Dirisu plays an undercover cop who's trying to infiltrate the main Irish gang.
Interesting.
And he has a Raid-esque, all-out, amazing fight in every single episode. And if you watch this guy, you watch this guy, he is just like a sledgehammer going through this show.
Nice.
And then Dev Patel, who has been floated around, who I think is, still primarily the Slumdog Millionaire guy, but he's put on a lot of muscle in the last couple years for The Green Knight.
Interesting.
And I think he's also gotten like handsomer and suaver as he's gotten older.
He's not a gangly teenager.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Any reactions to any of those? Dev Patel, John Boyega, Daniel Kaluuya.
No, I mean, I think that, again, they're all British. And really it is just kind of trying to find somebody who could, be both a ruthless killer and also very kind of smooth and charming in scenes.
But I think approach-wise, we probably all would like a slight reversion to the Pierce Brosnan version of Bond.
I'm going to throw one more name out that's probably, I'll say, in the more traditional vein, and that's Nicholas Hoult.
I have him on my list.
Oh, you do have him on
I have him on my list. I have a long list. I have him on my list.
When I was thinking this through and kind of looking at, British actors, he popped up. He's done, obviously, great work.
He's phenomenal on the TV show The Great.
Yeah.
If either of you watched that.
Yeah. And I mean, he's kind of got, obviously he's Beast in the X-Men. He was in Mad Max Fury Road.
He's Nux.
Yeah. And
watch him on The Great where he plays like a charming asshole.
Right. So, and he's got the physical size. I think he's like well over 6 feet.
Yeah.
And he's kind of, I think he would be somebody you could see him playing Bond for a while.
Yeah.
Like you could maximize, he's probably in his early 30s and has a youthful, I think, look, but again, is one of those type of, they buff him up and they make him kind of that action hero. I think he'd be a great choice. So, yeah,
I had initially sort of written him off as too famous.
You think so?
But then I was listening to the Rewatchables, Bill Simmons podcast, Rewatchables on Top Gun Maverick, and they were talking about who the final 3 people to play Rooster were, which were Miles Teller, Glenn Powell, who obviously both ended up in the movie, and Nicholas Hoult. And Bill Simmons, who's kind of a guy who knows a fair amount about movies, goes, who's Nicholas Hoult? And so I was like, okay, he's definitely not too famous to take over.
I think
Bond.
you do want to, obviously, with George Lazenby being the exception, and probably, I guess Sean Connery would agree, but, like you're saying, not too famous, but have
a proven body of work.
They've paid their dues enough to where, the leap is smaller. In the
you're not picking somebody who's like the third lead in a Globe Shakespeare production that nobody's heard of.
Yeah.
A couple names that I just want to throw out and we can knock down. Taron Egerton, constantly in the mix, but I think because of Eggsy and Kingsman, you can't cast him. George McKay, who is the lead of 1917,
he's great.
Has the Sam Mendes connection. He's definitely tall and physically imposing. And then Dan Stevens.
I like Dan Stevens. Yeah. He's
obviously charming. If you've seen The Guest, he can look intimidating and muscular.
If you've seen Beauty and the Beast, he can be a beast.
He's definitely somebody who's got the charm. He's handsome. I think because he was on Downton Abbey and so visible to a lot of women, it would bring a lot of women into the audience.
I want to say he has... I might be completely wrong, but I want to say he's done a Bond, like Audible book or one of he's read
really?
Or something like that. Another actor who would have played a great Bond and kind of did weirdly is Toby Stevens. He's probably too old now, but he played Gustav Graves in Die Another Day.
But he's gone on to do a lot of Bond like voice work.
Yes, he's actually played Bond more than anybody because he has played Bond for the BBC radio shows and stuff like that. I think 9 or 10 times. So. Yeah.
And I just want to throw it out there for the Harry Potter nerds. Daniel Radcliffe is too short. I'm sorry. Get over it.
I had him on my list, not as a serious contender, just like I would love to see that. I would just like if someone just made that, I'd be all in for it.
Now he's fantastic in The Lost City, which was not a movie I particularly cared for, but he plays the villain in that. He's very good.
No, he's fantastic.
He's always good. Yeah. Any other names that you guys have that you want to throw out before we move on to approach?
In a similar vein to does Bond have to be white is another one. Does he have to be male? And like, so I thought, and generally I feel like, I don't think that's necessarily a direction that makes the most sense in the world, but I thought, just for sake of thinking about it, I pulled Emily Blunt.
Okay.
I think she would be, if they were ever to do like a female Bond, I feel like she'd be great. Probably too old at this point as well.
Why she isn't doing more action films? Because like Edge of Tomorrow,
she was The Quiet Place, the 2 Quiet Place movies.
Yeah, but just I'm saying like she definitely, seems to have that. I
want to see her in a Bond style role of some kind.
Yes,
whether it's Bond.
Yes, or not. You want her to get her atomic blonde.
Can I throw one just long shot out? Okay. I think we bring Dalton back.
So I had
one more. Dalton, he's 76, but you know what? There's a genre completely built for like older actors.
So this is a good segue.
I'll be honest. I'll bring back.
Well, I would. Here's a good segue to approach. I don't think you can bring Dalton back because I think he looks too villainous in his old age.
He looked pretty villainous back in the day too.
But yes, he's definitely the most villainous looking of all the Bond actors. So one thing that I've always kind of thought would be interesting, they're not going to do this because this is not how they do business at Eon or at Amazon that now owns 50% of the franchise.
Oh boy.
I would have loved, after Craig, in order to sort of reset the whole thing, do a series of one-offs of different styles, different ideas, do Old Man Bond, bring back Pierce Brosnan for one last ride. Do a 1960s set Bond that's very classical with the gadgets and feels like a Connery era Bond. Do do black Bond, do lady Bond,
Right.
do gay Bond. Just throw all these and don't spend too much money on them. Make them like $50 to $75 million movies instead of $250 million movies, and just see what the audience responds to, see what works, because I feel like you need to get the audience to accept that Daniel Craig's version of James Bond is not the only version of James Bond. So throw a bunch out there and just stir the waters a little bit.
Right.
Feels like a Amazon original anthology series in the making. Like if they were to do something like that, it wouldn't be a series of movies. It would be like an anthology series where they do these kind of episodes or something.
Sure.
Which would be cool. I'd be into that.
I think that one of the things, okay, we'll explore different approaches. One thing you could do, I'm throwing this out there, this is a wild one, is if you took a slight break from Bond in the cinematic world, which you shouldn't do. It should be a Bond film in theaters every 2 years. And do kind of what you're talking about, where you could explore the other double O's.
And then you could get Idris Elba in there, you know,
get all the actors that you want to see play Bond and give them a 00 story or series. You know, you can get Ewan McGregor and you could get Idris Elba and you could get, you know, Tom Hiddleston, and explore the other 00 characters if you want to expand your universe.
Get deep into the mythology, show how the 00 program started.
Right. Link it into Felix Leiter, you know, build Felix Leiter out as a character as well.
Actually make Felix Leiter a competent agent instead of a bumbling American goon.
Right. And Dynamite, I'm very into the comics, so I read, you know, they did a Felix Leiter series 2 or 3 years ago, and it was pretty good. And so you could do, you know, you could do a Moneypenny series. I mean, not to just pick every single, like, oh, look, let's do a whole Q thing. I mean, that's kind of like you know, this guy, well, he was in the background of a Bond film once. Now he's getting his own movie.
Don't Disney Plus Star Wars it is what you're saying.
Right. Yeah. But you could build out, you know, you could, if you wanted to, build out the universe of Bond.
Yeah.
That's an option.
Now, in terms of like what the next series, the actual thing that they're going to make, I really, really want them to start embracing some of the more classical elements of the franchise. I love Ben Whishaw. I really find him charming as Q.
Yeah.
I want him to get like an actual Q scene where they're touring the workshop with all the gadgets.
Yes.
Yeah, his appearances have all been, here's this totally mundane object that will help you at a specific point.
Right.
There's like nothing whimsical about it.
Right. I want the Desmond Llewellyn, 10 gags in a 2-minute space.
I call it a ghetto blaster.
To quote from the most racist of the Bond movies.
Wait, that's from...
Live and Let Die.
No, that's from Living Daylights.
Oh, I just assumed it was from Live and Let Die.
It's from the
I assumed the racist joke was from Live and Let Die.
They have the bazooka inside the stereo.
Yeah. I kind of just want to see him jump the shark again. Like
you love Moonraker, so
I just want to go full Moore era. Just like make the worst decisions. Just go ham with it.
I guess in a weird way, like, has our society become too? I guess we'll say, I don't want to say cynical.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. 100%. 100%.
Because I look at, in some ways, the part of the reason why Bond, you know, we'll just kind of say, like, in a post 9/11 kind of world, you know, the kind of goofiness of warfare seemed a little less, and, you know, seemed a little less, I don't know. It just,
the
it didn't
temperature
land.
changed on that.
Right. So you can kind of see why Bourne and Bond, you know, both taking more a grounded, realistic approach, you know, that people kind of are like, they could believe this character. And also, like, in Casino Royale, one of the things I remember that just like stunned me when I watched that film the first time was after the airport chase sequence when Bond spills out of that truck and he's all beaten up and he's all bloody and he just looks, and of course Timothy Dalton looks the same way at the end of License to Kill, but generally speaking Bond kind of always was very dapper, you know, in all these scenes, and there was definitely this bloody, beaten, like your heroes can die approach.
And I think that made a lot of sense in our dark, gritty reboot mid-aughts version. But the biggest movies in the world are the Marvel movies, which are bright and poppy and jokey and they have tons of gadgets and ridiculous stuff. I see no reason why an audience would reject a lighter approach to Bond now.
And
because I think people want that. They clearly vote with their dollars that they want that.
I think that Bond is, like, in some ways the biggest escapist kind of fantasy that there is. And I think that in a lot of ways he works very well when you just go out there with the character. Like you can do that with him and you can stretch him. He's kind of like Batman for some reason. You can kind of take the character in different directions. The character can bend a lot without breaking. And so, you know, I think that you could do a more over the top fun, I say over the top, like, but just like really going for it, Bond film, and it would land.
I want the crazy layers, the villain layers. I want the gadgets, crazy plot, the villain schemes. And can we stop just casting Oscar winners as Bond villains? Can we go back to, here's a character actor you don't recognize? When people forget about Casino Royale, Mads Mikkelsen was completely unknown in America. He had done, I mean, he was famous in Denmark because he had done Pusher 1 and especially Pusher 2, which was his star vehicle. If you haven't seen Nicholas Winding reference Pusher Trilogy, drop what you're doing, watch them. They're amazing. Especially number 2, where Mads Mikkelsen is the star, and that was sort of his breakout role internationally. But I want them to go find the character actors from around the world, or like what, you know, they get Christoph Waltz to play Blofeld in Spectre. I want them to be Quentin Tarantino casting Christoph Waltz in Inglourious Bastards. And this guy that nobody in America has ever seen before just shows up on screen and is the scariest thing you've ever seen. Because he's a complete mystery to you.
Can I make a suggestion as well? This is going to be a drastic suggestion that I'm about. How about this?
Okay.
Why not go back to Legacy Bond? The next Bond is, in fact, now Daniel Craig is a standalone, obviously, because we've seen him from the beginning to the end. But the next Bond is the same James Bond he has the history, he has all of those things. And I know you're thinking, like, the kids today aren't going to know who blah, 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 and you're referencing all this type of stuff, yada, yada, yada. But I think that's discounting the fact that we live in a world now where all of these movies are super available. And even a young man like yourself, Sam, who, you know, got into Bond at Skyfall, you know, went back and was like, wow, there's like an interesting history here to this character, and I want to know more about it.
So I'm of two minds about this, and I have to back up to explain why I'm conflicted. I think one of the worst sort of legacies of the way we've interacted with TV shows and movies over the last 10 to 15 years is the obsession with continuity. Where it's like, and I think maybe it started with Lost and then got amplified by the MCU. And it's like the Redditification of film discourse, or the CinemaSinsification of film discourse, where what makes a good movie versus a bad movie is how closely connected it is to the previous 20 things you've watched. To the point where now we've got these multiverse movies in multiple franchises. They're like, we're going to bring back all your favorite characters from previous iterations of the the Spider-Man or Batman in the case of the upcoming Flash movie. So everything's canon and you get everything you want and you don't have to believe that anything didn't happen because everything is precious and perfect and special.
My jump the shark pitch was have all the living Bonds.
Which is, this gets into like the thing that has always pissed me off, which was the fan theory that James Bond is not the name of a person. It's an alias that's passed on. No, 007 is the alias that gets passed on. Just accept that there's not continuity. You know, Donald Pleasance plays Blofeld in You Only Live Twice, and he looks completely different than Telly Savalas playing him in the next movie, On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, they act like they haven't met before, and it doesn't matter. Just let them be standalone movies.
But I think, like, here's the thing. I think that I'm gonna push back a little bit, because I think that.
But can I just say one thing? Why I'm conflicted about your suggestion is because fuck the people who want the continuity from the Daniel Craig era. It's going to piss off a lot of people who want that continuity carried over. But also, it's like trying to reestablish the classical continuity, and I just don't care.
I think that there's only a few. The great thing about Bond is that, like, they've, and probably on purpose, never really, with Skyfall being the exception, never really delved too much into like his past. And in GoldenEye, and they seem to carry it over with Skyfall. You kind of learn that his parents had died in a climbing accident, and at some point he was recruited and he became a naval commander, and then, was recruited into the 00 program. And so there's really only a few kind of like benchmarks of continuity outside of Tracy Bond, that he was married at one point, very, 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 very briefly, very briefly married. But outside of that, there isn't necessarily like a lot. So I guess in some ways you could be like, well, then what's the point of, trying to hang on to continuity or go back into this universe of this Bond? But at the same time, I think that there's something kind of cool about being able to roll forward a lot of like all the achievements and accomplishments of the other Bond filmmakers and actors, and roll that forward. I
think you can bring all that stuff back without making it necessarily continuity.
Right. Yeah.
Because I agree with you that I want to see like the more classical elements brought back, but I don't think it needs to be part of some continuity. Now, I love the idea of bringing Pierce Brosnan back. I don't think you make $200 million by bringing Pierce Brosnan back.
No. Right.
We make a really fun Pierce Brosnan movie.
Well, yeah. And if you've,
Well, I mean, this is my whole thing with like, I'd love them to do smaller experiments, make a $40 million old man Pierce Brosnan Bond movie. Yeah. And if it only makes $100 million, you've turned a profit, That's the other thing. These movies don't need to cost $250 to $300 million. Right. They just don't. It shouldn't be that they have to be the biggest movie of the year to work. Yeah. I mean, this is a problem with the way all of Hollywood approaches blockbuster filmmaking, obviously.
Yeah.
But
you don't have any medium budget movies anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But how is Graham going to be able to do his Moonraker sequence in an updated without, he needs we need $200 million.
Well, I mean, if you look at the, guys, if you look at the finale of a certain project that we're talking about, Graham may just get exactly what he wants.
Yeah. Yeah. So
tease.
So I don't know. There's old man Bond. There could be young man Bond.
Baby Bond.
You could go back and be like
Boss Baby Bond.
Right. How did Bond become Bond? Like
do a young Indiana Jones.
Right. God, and do. No. And do. It's that. But here's the thing. Here's the other thing though. Bond works. And I know, like, when you kind of said the 30s, he works. He's a character that like works a little older in a weird way. Like you feel as though this person has a level of experience that it makes it very believable that when he's in these situations, he's able to really get himself out because he's at some point encountered this, whether on another mission or in training or whatever. So yeah, you could do a young Bond series, which, you know, they've flirted with in like comic book and cartoon form and stuff like that. But I don't know. I think that Bond also does appeal to an older audience, and I think that those are important box office dollars to kind of keep motivated. So
yeah, I mean, dads are the number one demographic, I feel like, for most Bonds. If you lose the dads, you've lost your audience.
Yeah, you need so you want Bond to kind of appeal to that way.
Yeah. One final note before we close out this episode, just as I'm looking at this photo, is chin size the most underrated?
That was the number one factor in me picking Robert Pattinson. He's got the chin.
He's got the chin. So I had Jack Rayner on my list. I didn't mention him. Jack Rayner, great chin.
Oh, okay.
Great chin.
Yeah, great
Tom
chin.
Hiddleston, not a great chin.
No. Because it's kind of hard to find a British person with a good chin. Not a chin-having people.
Who's
Henry
not already
Cavill.
playing Superman.
Yeah, great chin. Chin plant. I guess they could get chin plants. But yeah, I don't know. But I guess let me ask you, Sam, because I know you just talked about it, but just real quick, what would really you had the keys to Bond? Where would you go?
Oh God, I would take it back to GoldenEye.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's kind of where this franchise needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like a sweet spot.
Yeah, which is right in between the modern incarnation. It feels modern, but it still has all the classical stuff. It's got the great villain, got the henchwoman, it's got the lair, it's got
gadgets.
It's got a great Desmond Llewellyn Q sequence. It's got Judi Dench bringing this gravitas in her first appearance as M.
We haven't taken the time to mention just how much she transformed, the tone of the series.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because especially in her first scene where she calls him a sexist, misogynist dinosaur or whatever.
Relic of the Cold War.
Yeah. She just brings this incredible sense of gravitas is the only word for it.
Mm-hmm.
Star of the series, Judi Dench.
I whenever I hear her in the movie, I just feel like I'm on Spaceship Earth at Epcot.
And I think, oh, that's right. And I think that they altered the dynamic between Bond and M just a little bit, drove a lot more of the tension between the two of them in a cool way.
I would be, obviously they need to bring Ralph Fiennes back as M.
Yeah.
I would bring Naomi Harris back as Moneypenny. Mm-hmm. I think you maybe just resurrect Jeffrey Wright as Felix Leiter because he's perfect as Felix Leiter.
Great.
But I am curious what the Ralph Fiennes M dynamic is going to be moving forward.
Yeah.
Because much as I like him and I think he's good in the role, he hasn't played the same kind of adversarial parental role that Judi Dench played.
Mm-hmm. Can I just say one more thing?
Yeah.
Before we close this segment, I think that Bond is, people kind of always, when I said earlier, he's at this crossroads or whatever, I think that that's obviously more in just kind of which direction or approach you take with the character. But in terms of Bond there's always this kind of feeling is he outdated? Is this character, the relic of the past type of thing? And even when you watch the Bond films, not to get meta here, but Bond is constantly up against the wall and he always manages to survive. He always manages to push forward, with No Time to Die being the exception to this. But outside of that, James Bond will return and he outlasts any attempt to try to kill him, take him out, or anything like that. And the character itself in our world is like that. People want escapist entertainment. The Bond films have basically increasingly made money since the 90s. People need that escapist and entertainment, that fun character, and James Bond kind of encapsulates that. So I don't think that there's ever any like, oh, Bond's run his course type of thing. I think that there's still plenty of lead in this pencil.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Thank you for joining us for another Bondversation. We'll be back next time talking about the parkour sequence in Casino Royale.